Hello, my name is PJ, and I am currently enrolled in a Buddhism class at the Miami Valley School. Our assignment for this week was to go online and pick a podcast or download a seminar from either Reggie Ray or Trungpa Rinpoche, and then create a video response to it. And I ended up choosing a 45-minute lecture from Reggie Ray, which I actually just finished before recording this, and it's called When Reality Strikes. He started with the lines, "I feel so much pressure, so much is at stake," and bringing in all these really serious topics. And I think he did this because 99% of the entire population can relate to pressure. And so he immediately grabbed my attention. And it turns out that these lines corresponded to his view of his life plan, because he never planned on being a type of teacher to make Buddhist seminars, but he never accounted for reality, and when reality struck, that was the final word, and that is where he ended up, tying in the title of the seminar, When Reality Strikes, which I put in the link to that seminar in the comments below, and it's a free download, so you all should download it. So the first few lines were actually extremely relatable to me already, even though he didn't even start to cover the topic he was going to. So obviously he said the solution to, I guess, stop battling reality and to actually use it to your advantage was Buddhism. But he introduces the solution not as just Buddhism, but allowing yourself to let go. Because he said holding yourself together is actually the problem. And although we long for a way to let go, most people don't know how. But Buddhism teaches us how to. He describes it as quite a strange tradition because it gives people the tools to see in the dark and to hear things in silence. He goes on to further describe it through a very long metaphor of this bubble. And he says this is the bubble of personal and cultural ego. And we all live in the bubble, maybe without even knowing it, because most people think that they know reality, but they don't. And he says there's actually a form of Buddhism that lives in this bubble. And it's the type of Buddhism, unfortunately, that we mostly learn about in books, just by people who don't know what they're talking about, honestly. But he said the version of Buddhism that he's talking about is actually outside the bubble. So he pretty much asked the audience that he was talking to literally forget about everything they knew about Buddhism, everything they knew about themselves, their peers, the world in general, and to listen to him because he was about to describe the Buddhism that helps get us out of that bubble of our ego. Because the world we see in the world we think exists actually doesn't. It's just a fantasy, and it's just something that we project onto the world that's actually there. And he said the key, or the gate, to get out of this bubble is actually meditation. And through meditation you can learn what Buddhism is actually about, which he identifies as the Dharma. And he describes the Dharma as the deepest truth of your own life, being, feelings, and perceptions. It is the truth and reality that happens when the mind becomes silent, and it can never be anticipated. It is hard to anticipate because reality, he says, isn't any particular way at all. And it's completely unique and happens different every time. I know I do this all the time, but we try to make patterns and we try to find something familiar in everyday life. But he's saying every day is completely unique and completely different. And he uses the example of falling asleep. He says you may think that you just lay down, fall asleep, whatever, but it's actually different every single time. You lay down in a different way, you fall asleep in a different way, you drift in and out of consciousness in a different way, even on a microscopic level. Reality isn't any particular way at all, and it's infinite. And because of this infinity, everything and everyone is a reflection of the entire universe and all its powers and all its vastness, which, if you think about it, that is incredible. Like, this is true for all realms and all people. Like, any object that you grab around your room, like the universe is represented in that, and it's represented in all of us too, which is so cool. But usually we can't see this because we've been taught to place ourselves, as he describes, in a pecking order, and we tend to compare ourselves, young versus old ranges of emotional sensitivity, wealth, family, functionality, etc. And he says that everyone has their certain place, and if you try to get out of that place, you get pecked to death. We try to fit ourselves into a box that is 1,000,000 times smaller than us. We just try to categorize people, and we can't, because like I said, the entire universe is represented by us. So how can we even begin to place people in pecking orders, or any order in general? I know this is true because a friend of mine just recently, I guess, lost the opportunity to do one of her hobbies. It was a sport, and she's been doing it her whole life, but now she has to stop because of a bunch of reasons. And she said, without this sport, I'm nothing. Like, that's who I am. And that's not right, because she's so much more than that, and everyone is so much more than just one thing that they do. So we've been taught to simplify ourselves since a young age, and he uses another example of him being younger, and he uses the example, but I'm pretty sure this happened to everybody, but when I was younger and when Reggie Ray was younger, apparently, he saw people and thought they seemed to be okay, like they seemed to be happy. You looked at adults and saw them smiling, and you knew that they were okay. But now, you realize that no one is really okay, and especially with parents, I don't think until middle school you realize that your parents aren't perfect, and then you don't realize until high school that your parents aren't perfect because they actually have their own problems that they have to deal with. So everyone carries a deep sense of pain and fear, and everyone has those battles going on in their head, and we need to realize that and account for that. But that's a simple concept, that everyone has their own problems, but he says that that shouldn't be a negative thing, that shouldn't bring us down, because he describes it as something that we could use to power ourselves. And my favorite example of the entire seminar was the example of a man named Melodomisoma, who was a chief of a village, and he said that when anyone in his village goes through something really powerful or highly emotional, they actually see it as that person's ancestors working through them to communicate a lesson to everyone else, which is actually really cool. I'm not saying that we should all adopt this belief, but we could tie it into the lesson that we can learn from other people's experiences and the battles that they're dealing with, as if their ancestors were trying to tell us something.